So, do you know exactly how your costs behave? It sounds like a super basic business question, right? But man, let me tell you, misjudging this is literally where thousands of accounting students bleed critical marks. The examiner absolutely loves to set traps around cost behavior, kind of masking these really simple concepts in incredibly tricky phrasing. If you don't know the precise mechanical details of how your costs shift the second your production changes, you are basically walking into the exam completely blind. This definitely demands your immediate attention. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're building your ultimate cost classification survival guide. I'm going to help you completely master exactly how different costs react to changes in activity. By the time we wrap this up, you'll have all the tools you need to spot those common examiner traps from a mile away and honestly, save your score. All right, Section 1, Mastering Fixed Costs. We're coming right out of the gate with a cost type that catches out the most students. Okay, so here is the absolute golden rule of fixed costs. They remain totally constant in total over a given range of activity, but they actually act like a variable cost per unit. Seriously, I need you to commit this to memory right now. Constant in total, variable per unit. To kind of ground this in reality, just picture your factory rent, or maybe your non-production salaries, like for your management team, or your building insurance. These costs, they do not care if you produce 10 units today or 10,000. The total bill you have to pay at the end of the month stays exactly the same, regardless of how much you actually end up making. And this is where the math gets really interesting. If you think about your total fixed cost, it's just a perfectly flat, horizontal straight line. But look at the per unit side of things. It's actually a downward curve. If your factory rent is 10,000 pounds and you only make one single unit, well, that unit costs 10,000 pounds in rent. But what if you make 10,000 units? Suddenly, the rent plummets to just 1 pound per unit. As your activity goes up, that fixed cost per unit falls. So, here's the trap. The absolute crucial phrase to watch out for is this: cost per unit decreases when output increases. When you see those exact words in an exam scenario, alarm bells should be ringing in your head. This describes a fixed cost, not a variable one. The examiner uses this exact phrasing specifically to bait you into choosing variable, because the word decreases kind of implies a change, right? Do not fall for it. Moving right along to Section 2, Decoding Variable Costs. Let's completely flip the script and see how these ones behave. The foundational law for variable costs is this: they remain constant per unit, but the total cost varies in direct proportion to activity. Notice how sharply that contrasts with the fixed cost behavior we just locked down? It is literally the exact mirror image. You definitely know these ones. We're talking raw materials, direct labor, specifically if they're being paid per unit produced, that is, and sales commissions. These are costs that only trigger when an actual unit is produced. If your factory floor is completely shut down for the day and output is zero, guess what? Your total variable cost is zero. Visualizing this, it's the total opposite of our fixed costs. If your raw material is 5 pounds per unit, that unit cost stays perfectly flat. It is a totally horizontal line. Your 5th unit costs 5 pounds and your 500th unit costs 5 pounds. But your total cost? That thing rockets upward as a straight line starting right from zero. If your output doubles from 100 units to 200, your total material cost strictly doubles too, from 500 pounds to 1,000. Okay, burn this exact phrase into your memory. Total cost increases proportionately with output. If you are reading through a scenario and you spot those words, it is the ultimate giveaway for a variable cost. The examiner is literally handing you the correct answer on a silver platter, as long as you know how to decode their language. All right, Section 3, Semi-variable costs. Now that we've totally mastered the two extremes, let's talk about the hybrid trap. Sometimes called mixed costs, a semi-variable cost mashes together a base flat fee with an additional variable usage rate. Because of that fixed base, it literally never drops to zero, but it absolutely still rises as activity increases because of that variable add-on. The classic real-world examples here are your utility bills. Think about your factory's electricity bill. You're paying a fixed standing charge just to be connected to the grid, right? Plus, you have a variable charge for every single kilowatt you actually consume. Or think of a telephone bill, where you pay a flat line rental whether you make calls or not, plus the variable charges for the calls themselves. It's a fixed amount just to have the service, plus a variable amount for what you actually use.
Now, when you inevitably face a semi-variable cost in an assessment, you can't just leave it mashed up like that. You need a specific weapon to split it apart, and that weapon is the high-low method. It lets you take the highest and lowest activity levels to isolate that variable cost per unit, and then you can easily back out the fixed cost portion. So always remember, when you see a mixed cost, immediately think high-low method.
Which brings us to Section 4, step costs. Finally, we have to tackle the sneaky, threshold-jumping behavior of step costs. A step cost is an expense that stays fixed within a certain range or band of activity, but then it suddenly jumps up to a whole new level the second a threshold is crossed. They basically behave identically to fixed costs right up until you hit that critical breaking point. Let's use the classic supervisor rule to really illustrate this. Say one supervisor can safely manage up to 20 workers. For anywhere from 0 to 20 workers, your supervisor cost is totally flat. You're just paying one salary. But the very second you hire worker number 21, well, you can't hire a fraction of a person, right? You suddenly have to pay for an entire second supervisor, which instantly doubles your cost. The exact same logic goes for renting a warehouse. Maybe it fits up to 10,000 units, but if you make unit 10,001, you have to rent a whole second building. So instead of a nice smooth line, step costs create these stark, jagged staircase-like jumps. It's completely flat from 0 to 20, and then boom, a massive jump straight up for 21 to 40, and then another big jump at 41. This really hammers home exactly what happens to your total cost when your activity crosses one of those thresholds. And wow, here is a classic examiner trick you've got to watch out for. They love testing your knowledge by moving the activity just slightly. If production changes from 18 to 19 workers, the cost is totally fixed. Literally nothing happens to it. But if it changes from 20 to 21 workers, which is still just a 1-unit difference, the total cost completely jumps. You must always check where your activity level is relative to that step threshold. All right, Section 5, Surviving the Exam Traps. We've broken down all 4 behaviors, and now it's time to lock them in. I highly recommend grabbing a screenshot of this master summary table right now. This is genuinely your ultimate defense. It neatly summarizes exactly how fixed, variable, semi-variable, and step costs act in total and per unit. Truly understanding the differences across these columns pretty much guarantees your safety against every single total versus unit phrasing trick the examiner can possibly throw at you. To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge to test your unshakable new grasp of cost behavior. Think about this. If your cost per unit is steadily falling, but then your total cost suddenly jumps to a whole new band, what exact combination of behaviors are you actually looking at? Think about how a step cost acts per unit as it fills up a band right before it takes that massive jump. Try putting those pieces together. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep studying smart, and I'll see you next time.